Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we go behind the scenes of a new TV documentary about the RAF.
Part of the whole process of getting on board with Channel 4 and True North, the production company, is that we were going to sacrifice some editorial control.
No one had done it before, and the idea of filming operations immediately filled everybody with a little bit of kind of OPSEC dread.
I've been in for 18 years now, and this is the first engagement I've really had with any sort of form of media. And I'll be honest, I've always tried to avoid it a little bit.
Also, in this episode, we'll reheat a few stories just in case you missed them, and we'll be finding out who is under the hat this week.
So we deploy out, we work for field kitchens, and the chefs that we have, they just produce food that you wouldn't think they'd be able to create in the environment that they have.
Find out who is under the hat at the end of this episode. Now, how do you make a TV documentary on a busy, operational and in places secretive RAF station? Balancing the needs and wishes of the people being filmed, the film crew and ultimately the viewers is no easy task. Inside Air's Air Specialist 1 Emma Kirwan spoke to the people behind and in front of the cameras for the second series of Top Guns Inside the RAF.
When you hear the words Top Gun, what do you think of? Probably that 1986 movie starring Tom Cruise. You know the one, Maverick. I feel the need for speed and all of that. But what about Top Guns inside the RAF? Well, with Series 1 gripping the nation, you might have already heard about the documentary series that came out back in 2023. Now, Series 2 has landed and it's been taken up a notch.
This is the first time going anywhere like the Black Sea.
Good morning, Ascot 9958, flight 3, climbing to the block, flight level 280, flight level 300.
We know 100% there's going to be Russian surface-to-air missile systems that will be looking at us, Russian fighter jets. We don't know what's going to happen.
Havoc 2 nails Russian aircraft, 050 degrees.
That is a Russian fighter jet, a very capable aircraft, and I can do absolutely nothing about this if he decides to pull the trigger.
From inside the cockpits of fast jet fighter bombers to first-time filming of remotely piloted aircraft operating from top-secret bases in the UK, Series 2 takes viewers back into the skies, command centres and hangars as the RAF crews continue to defend Britain's skies. But what about the personnel who agreed to let a film crew follow them around for a year, in some cases, and put themselves out there to the public, just to show what the RAF does? What was their experience of the documentary process and getting that up close and personal with the media? Let's hear from Mark Tattersall, the show's executive producer. I chatted to him and Squadron Leader Charlie because they worked together to ensure the RAF's people and assets were protected during filming and thereafter. I wanted to find out how the RAF agreed to Series 1 in the first place, never mind Series 2. Oh, and of course we had to discuss the show's name. Let's start with that.
It was originally actually going to be called Warplane, but it went through extensive taste testing with the channel and the production company themselves, who put a load of different names in front of a kind of test audience. And they came out with Top Guns, which is a bit difficult for us as the Air Force, because anyone who's watched Top Guns or is familiar with the Navy knows that Top Guns are naval aviators. And this is a show about the Royal Air Force. So a bit difficult there. And it's one of the most common questions I get about the show. But part of the whole process of getting on board with Channel 4 and True North, the production company, is that we were going to sacrifice some editorial control. And the name falls under that kind of remit, really. I think for some of the folks who've been in the military maybe 20, 30 years ago, especially when the military was much bigger than it currently is, there was a lot more inter-rivalry between the Navy and the RAF, and we were probably a lot more siloed in how they used to operate than we kind of operate now. Now it's very much all three services working really closely together, because that's the only way you can really work in operations. Whereas in the past, I think it was very much the Air Force does the aircraft stuff, the Navy does some of the aircraft stuff, but it's at sea, and the Army are kind of staying very firmly on land. But now we're all kind of collaborating, doing things together. So most of the comments that we get are kind of looking at us a little bit unfavorably for the name, because we should know better that Top Gun's a Navy and not RAF. And I can kind of see where they're coming from, but it's a wider decision that's made by the channel to kind of make the show appeal to a broader audience, because most of the public associate Top Gun with fast jet flying, not with naval aviation exclusively.
Okay, can we start off with a little bit of background firstly on this project for someone who might not know anything about it, might not even watch series 1? How did it begin?
So it all began quite a few years ago. We'd made a few series with the Royal Navy on warships, destroyers and frigates, and then on submarines. And someone set us the challenge for doing the same kind of operational programming for the RAF. We met with the RAF. Immediately, there was a lot of excitement about the opportunity, the potential of doing this, but nobody really understood at that stage, ourselves included, just quite how to pull this off. No one had done it before, and the idea of filming operations immediately filled everybody with a little bit of kind of OPSEC dread. So we slowly began piecing together, working with Air Media, pulling more and more people in to understand how we might go about doing this. And then slowly, this thing was born that became Top Gun's Inside the RAF.
And so what about from your point of view? When did you get involved in this?
So I was roped into the project midway through Series 1. I was working in MOD main building in a completely different job, but that was my background. And the first series at Lossiemouth, I was brought on board to kind of help the team on the ground and also Air Media to try and unstick a few of the teething problems, because after all, this was the first time in a long while that the Air Force had done a documentary. We're really well versed in doing news coverage and covering events on a day-to-day basis, but something that's this long, sustained, requiring that much of kind of effort kind of was all new to everyone. And about 14 months ago now, towards the end of 2023 was when this all started. And we had a bit of a blueprint as to how it was going to work. We knew it was going to take a lot of planning, a lot of time on the ground to get face-to-face interaction with people, to warm them up to the idea of what it was going to involve, and be really honest about the time that it was going to take. And one of the stats that I really like sharing, and I know Mark likes sharing too, is that less than 1%, and it's probably even less than 0.5% of all of the footage that we capture is actually used in the final 6 episodes. So it's just a huge amount of multimedia, huge amount of work for what ends up being 6 times 45-ish minute episodes.
How does Series 2 differ from Series 1?
First thing is the location. We moved away from Lossiemouth and we moved to Lincolnshire. We wanted to show more operations. It was obviously a little bit more challenging because we didn't know what was going to happen. At Lossiemouth, you know that Poseidon is always on kind of patrol and you have a bit more of a sense of what's going to happen. But at Coningsby, you're at the whim of where the squadrons are, what they're doing, what they're deployed on.
From our perspective, Series 1 was well received, but like any new series, you're breaking new ground and still exploring the art of the possible. And with the help of the RAF, we've unlocked things that the audiences just haven't seen before. We got cameras into Reaper, filming operations, flying over Iraq with the teams inside those GCSs, at RAF Waddington. That's just never been done before. It's never been approached before. Operationally on the ground at Akrotiri with, deployed elements of 11 Squadron from Coningsby. The operations that we filmed, absolutely we got lucky because we were there at the right place at the right time. But it was only because of the work we'd done previously in Series 1 and in the development of Series 2 that helped us get those cameras, get those personnel into that position where we were able to capture some of those stories. So when you see bombs being dropped on Houthi missile sites in Episode 2 or with Episode 1, when you've got, interactions over Iraq where RAF Typhoons are helping to intercept Iranian Delta Wing drones that are destined for Israel, having our cameras in that cockpit, being able to unlock that footage, the audio, the cameras that go with it, the lightning pod that's on the bottom of the Typhoon, all the elements of the jigsaw, the briefings, the debriefings, the master interviews with the pilots, the stuff on base, to be able to get all of that. It's a huge jigsaw. You don't just turn up and film it in a day and everything's in the can.
There were so many plans we had at the start to do lots and lots of face-to-face engagement with people on the ground, which we did a lot of, but I would have loved to have done more and pulled more people into the fold and given them a really deep insight into how this was all going to work. And then all of a sudden, the world changes. We need to be in Akrotiri in a week. And that's where our priority swings to. And that's certainly what happened in this series. And I think it's a testament to everyone on the Air Force side for their quick reactions to get everyone to Akrotiri really quickly, to sort all the paperwork and the kind of the red tape needed to make that happen. That is the reason why you see so many operations, frontline operations for real in the cockpit and from the Lightning pod.
There are moments, obviously, where the RAF, it is that quiet time where you have time to get set up and settled and do those interviews, but the RAF also has to be ready to fight and fly at a moment's notice and be deployable. So how did you respond and deal with those quick moments that you needed to be ready for?
The first thing is having the right relationships so that you know that when something's about to happen, we're with the right people. That might be a contributor, or it might be a minder who can get you through a doorway that you don't know the code for. There's kind of, the programming side of your head and the logistical side of your head. And the great thing about the military is you kind of do things the same way every time. That's how it's drilled into you. So there's a certain amount of predictability that we can sort of bake into our plans almost. But you also, alongside those great relationships, need to know how the military works. The big problem for us is when crunchy things happen, 9 times out of 10, there's a huge OPSEC challenge that it brings with it. These could be operations that are happening in the moment that haven't been publicly announced and disseminated by, the powers that be. Or it could just be a really interesting PERSEC challenge with someone with a very unique set of circumstances and a background. So as program makers, we need to know where to be, when to film, how to film, but also crucially what not to film. Because if we go filming everything that the camera can capture, in all of the environments that we're going through or transiting through, there's a very real possibility that by the end of the day, when we're having those rushes reviewed, which is a regular occurrence in those crunchier operational settings, we could be told, look, I'm really sorry, but you've captured something there that we just simply cannot allow you to have for genuine reasons of national security. A lot of the areas we're going through, people are working at secret or even top secret. That's a real possibility, which is why the clearances that we have without the cameras and the electronics is really important. We never could have predicted that Iran would attack Israel. We never could have predicted that we'd be there when the RAF were called to go and drop bombs on Houthi rebels. We never could have predicted the tragic death of Squadron Leader Mark Long flying a Spitfire plane. Those sorts of things you can never predict. You just hope for the best, that you get the opportunity to tell some interesting and engaging stories that will resonate with an audience. We were challenged immeasurably, consistently, trust me, by the stories that we were faced with, whether that be an OPSEC issue from the crunchier stories, or actually emotionally from some of the things that happened surrounding the death of Mark Long. Our team were very affected by that. Mark was a very well-liked individual and was superb to us from the day we met him. Very, very helpful every time we saw him, incredibly friendly and kind. And some of our team, had to take some time away from the project as a result of what happened.
Mark Long was one of the first people who spoke to us, who was really keen on what we were trying to set out to do. And it became evident very quickly that he was well respected, well liked, very good at what he did. We were naturally capturing him through 29 Squadron, the operational conversion unit, where pilots who've gone through all of the other bits of flying training come to Coningsby to fly the Typhoon for the first time. And that's what episode 3 is all about. The news of the Spitfire crash happened and I think started to reverberate around the RAF community and probably the wider community. It's always horrible hearing of any crash, but when you know it's a crash in a community of people who you've been working really closely with, who you're likely to know of or know as friends, colleagues, it is really difficult. When it came to the final edits and working out how we were going to broach this really sensitive subject, we knew first and foremost Mark's family had to be the first ones to see all the footage. And that was what was done. So we liaised with the family's visiting officer, who was assigned after the incident had happened, and the family were given a first kind of preview of all of the footage, and were asked for their honest opinion. someone has lost their life and has left behind a family, and for anyone that's always going to be hugely difficult. You're comforting the family and providing them with that reassurance that the story is going to be told in a sensitive way.
How they're feeling about the episode being aired for the public to see.
I know that they were happy with the final episode and how the story is told. I think personally it does Mark Long justice. I think it really shows him as really charismatic, well-loved, well-liked professional. And I can only imagine what they'll be thinking.
As you heard, not only does Series 2 cover what's involved in military operations, but also it shows the emotional impact of them, like losing a loved one who's in the RAF, and how hard it can be leaving family when you're deployed. On that, I spoke to Wing Commander Jenny, Chief of Staff on Otbologsy deployment in Romania.
I'm only in the first episode and only briefly, and I think where the narrative is quite useful when they focus on me, it does just give you that insight into the sort of behind the scenes, behind the action, really. It's not I'm not flying an aircraft, I'm not in amongst all the, the high level briefings and what have you. I am just trying to help the boss manage the people, the expectations, manage the communications. Bear in mind there was a lot going on at that time. There were, rising tensions in the Middle East. There are deployments of aircraft, all of which you see on the documentary. But there were also 220 people that needed to be told what was going on and needed to be made aware of what was happening. So you'll see some of that. But predominantly, I think the focus in that first episode, the narrative with me, is just that call home to my daughter, that link back home, that awareness that, maybe all of us have left someone or some people behind.
So this is the first time I've deployed since I've had Olivia, and it does feel different. It really does. What does that say? For being a super class role model. She got Star of the Week at school this week, which, in the grand scheme of things, with everything going on out here, is it a big deal? No, but to her, in her little 5-year-old world right now, that's massive. And I wasn't there.
How did you feel sharing that call with your daughter?
I took some persuading, to be honest, to share my FaceTime calls home. I agreed to do the one, but as long as, you'll notice my daughter can't be seen at all on the footage. You just sort of hear her voice. But I understood why. I understand why it was an important part of the story they were trying to tell, because it is just that little human element, like in amongst all the abbreviations and the jargon and the high tech stuff that's going on and the higher level conversations that are happening. It is just that very human interaction. I have my daughter's teddy out on detachment with me, and that's who I was calling her home with, so she could see her teddy and catch up with what's been going on in her little day. And it's just that stepping away from everything for 10 minutes and that little bit of normality creeps back in again. And then, you switch it off and you're back into it all again.
Now you've watched the footage of how they've put it together. Are you pleased with that decision to share that call?
I am pleased, actually. Like I said, I took some persuading to do it, but I do think it does add a very human element to the episode. And I think it's possibly something that will resonate with a lot of the viewers. You don't have to have kids to understand that it's difficult to be separated. Everyone had to leave something behind, right, for that detachment. So yeah, I'm glad I was persuaded. I think it worked quite well.
How was it then for you being able to balance being a mum and being deployed for the first time since having your baby?
More challenging than I thought it was going to be, if I'm honest. I think in my head it was going to be a lot more straightforward. I hadn't anticipated the sort of heightened emotions that I was going to feel as part of it. But like any other detachment, really, or any other deployment, once you're away, that's it. Like, your head's in the game, and you've just got to get on with it.
If you were to do anything like this again, even on a smaller scale, what are your take homes?
I probably wouldn't let them record me going for a run. I think that was a mistake, letting them film me running. Honestly, I think I've learned so much from this experience. It's been amazing. I would no longer be nervous about engaging with media again as part of my job. Like, I've been in for 18 years now, and this is the first engagement I've really had with any sort of form of media. And I'll be honest, I've always tried to avoid it a little bit, like I think most people do, a little bit unsure of what to do and how to conduct yourself. But the experience has been fascinating. Like, I've learned a lot, a lot. And I would definitely encourage people now going forward to get engaged with this kind of activity, because the benefits from it are just enormous. Like, people being able to recognize that the people that work within the Air Force and the Armed Forces are human beings, and having that interaction, I just think is way more valuable than I'd ever realized it could be. The team have been fantastic. So the Air Media team have just been phenomenal. They've reached out prior to us deploying, knowing that the film crew were going to be out there, giving us some, top tips. I was encouraged to go on a media techniques course, which I did just for a couple of days, which was fascinating, really, really good. And then afterwards, they have definitely followed up with a really comprehensive sort of care package, if you like, about what to do about your social media accounts, how to, tell friends and family what's going to be coming out. But yeah, all of this, though, has come through Air Media as advice, which has just been brilliant. I feel really supported, actually.
Tonight's wide-scale attack by Iran is a major escalation.
The entire Middle East now is on high alert.
Next, we're going to talk about Reaper, which features in episode 2. It's a remotely piloted medium-altitude, long-endurance aircraft designed for intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance and attack missions. Flight Lieutenant Ollie told me he agreed to be part of the show to help the public better understand what Reaper actually is.
So I was out on deployment in the Middle East at the time, working in the 83 Air Expeditionary Group, and I got an email from my squadron boss that said Channel 4 was going to film Top Gun's Series 2. We've put you forward. Would you like to do it? And in a slightly sleep-deprived state, I said yes, and I agreed to it, and then came back and we started.
Had you watched Series 1 at all?
I hadn't watched Series 1, no. Again, I'd seen clips of it, but I hadn't really seen Series 1, mainly because I sort of thought that I didn't really need to. I felt that, it was something I was living, I'd experienced. And it was only after I became involved with it that I actually sat down and watched some of Series 1.
So you really were going into it and agreeing to do it blind?
Yeah, completely and utterly blind.
What was your motivation for getting involved?
I think the main thing for me was that I'm so aware of how the use of Reaper and I think drones, or more properly remotely piloted aircraft, has been portrayed in the media for so long. We've had such a negative spin from people who don't really know how they work, how they operate, and in most cases just take a rough guess, because the sort of hysteria and the myth factor around what it is we do sells better. I think there's a ongoing image of drones being these killer robots that fly around the Middle East with impunity and complete autonomy and basically do whatever they want to do. And from my perspective, I thought it was important to really start to try and humanize what it is we do and try and show people that there are real people behind every decision that is made. We're not just taking things for granted. We're not just taking decisions based on no information. There's a full team to support us. We've got legal people, we've got political advisors, we've got targeteers, senior military officials who will sit behind the decisions that we make and ensure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet.
You're doing a really important job as well. Can you talk us through what Reaper was actually doing in the Middle East?
We were on Operation Shader, which is the defeat of Daesh within the Middle East. And we were, from the 7 sorties that they filmed, we were flying basically counter Daesh mission sets throughout. The big sort of takeaways were for the first 5, we did very little and actually didn't get much useful footage. But then with the last 2, we were doing something that I think worked far better for them. And the main thing is that the Op Shader is not just about our interactions. We're working with the Americans, we're working with the Iraqi government, we're working with lots of different NATO nations, and everyone's pulling in together and pulling their weight. So I think it was good to sort of show them that, especially given the time frame of when this was filmed and the things that were going on in the Middle East at that time. It was a really important theatre. And I think that's evident from the typhoon strikes that took place in Yemen that were filmed as well. It was a really busy period of time, and I think it's good for the public to see that lots and lots of different aircraft and assets and people are all involved with carrying out the mission sets that His Majesty's government want us to do.
The public will have been probably reading the headlines and seeing everything that was going on. Some people might find it extremely scary, some misinformation out there, and I guess this is helping clear up what you actually were doing on this arc.
Of course, I think everyone is aware that the media is now a battleground. There is so much false information. I don't like the term fake news, but it is out there. And that was the point of why I wanted to get involved, was because there is so much misinformation about how Reaper operates. Anyone who's played Call of Duty knows what a Hellfire missile is and how it's shot from a Reaper. Anyone who's seen Eye in the Sky or Jack Ryan on Amazon, they're all things where Reaper have been depicted, but in every single sense, they're incorrect with it. They get it wrong. And I think it was important to sort of show the public that, as I said to you before, there are people behind it, and try and humanize it more than it is.
And it's giving it a spotlight as well.
Absolutely. With 31 Squadron, who are going to take over with Protector, and it should be flying this summer, we're going to be taking that aircraft to air shows. And it needs to have a bit of time in the spotlight. Obviously, the mission sets we do, oftentimes we don't want the spotlight. But I think an awareness of what the aircraft is, what its sort of vague capabilities are, and how it operates on a day-to-day basis, there's no issue with the public having that, and I think actually it's beneficial.
Just going back to the actual media experience then, can you just talk us through, I know you said that Ben did, fit in really well, but can you just talk us through a little bit more detail about your whole experience during the filming process?
Turned up and we had Ben, the media guy. There were RAF representatives there as well. Essentially, we sat down, had a chat about what they wanted, where we'd be getting footage from, how they were going to be operating, etc. He then, Ben came round to my room in the mess, and we had a chat there. He filmed a bit of stuff, bit of background about me. He did the same for the other members of the crew, and then the actual filming of the missions. He followed us into the brief. We did a quick brief, and they filmed the parts that they were allowed to. We then went and out-briefed. He'd come down to the box, or the GCS, and he'd sit there with us for the 7-8 hours of the sortie. If there was nothing going on, we'd just have a chat. If there was something going on, they'd be asking questions about what it was we were doing, why we were doing it, who we were working for, etc. And at all times, they were really engaged with us. They were very respectful when we asked them to, reshoot something, leave something out, or just be quiet for a bit because we were busy doing something else. Then they fully understood that, fully got it, and at every moment, I didn't have any issue with them at all during that process.
How confident do you feel dealing with the media?
I think when I went into this, I wasn't particularly confident. Everyone has heard the horror stories of how the media are, and I think most of the people on 13 Squadron said I was crazy for doing it. And I do think there's a genuine sort of fear of dealing with the media in the military. But I think now, and even after that first day, we were sat down, put at ease, and as I said, there were absolutely no issues. So I would be perfectly happy to deal with them again in the future.
If you want to find out more about Top Gun's Inside the RAF, you might be pleased to know this is part 1 of 2 episodes where we're going behind the scenes and telling you all about the filming process and bringing you the experiences of personnel, honest views about how they found it and why they actually wanted to get involved in the first place. In the meantime, you can obviously watch the series on Channel 4. Thanks for listening. I'm AS1 Emma Kirwan.
This is Reheat for Inside Air, where we take a look at some of the RAF stories you may have missed. I'm AS1 Chris Keane. The RAF is flight testing the new Protector RG-1 remotely piloted air system from its home base in Lincoln. Under the supervision of 56 Squadron, supported by 31 and 54 Squadrons, its second UK flight was undertaken with an all-UK crew flying from the new RAF ground station building at RAF Waddington. This year marks 40 years since the Band of the RAF Germany coach crash. On the 11th of February 1985, the band was travelling by coach when it collided with an aviation tanker on the Autobahn in Langenbruck. The devastating accident resulted in 21 people losing their lives, 19 RAF musicians, an RAF police officer and the civilian coach driver. Annual services were held in the Memorial Gardens at North Holton Cranwell, where each site has a monument for those who lost their lives. An RAF sergeant has been hailed a hero after running several miles through snow and ice to rescue an American woman who plunged into a ravine in Utah. Sergeant Benstead, an RAF liaison officer based in Las Vegas, ran through Utah's snowy mountains to raise the alarm, and thanks to his quick response, an air ambulance was deployed to provide the injured woman with the treatment she needed. You may remember last year on Reheat, we were talking about the launch of UK Space Command's first satellite, Tyche. Well, now that satellite is able to take real-time photos of anywhere on Earth when the armed forces need it, which will support military operations around the world. And finally, X marks the spot at RAF Valley as long-lost Iron Age artefacts were discovered beneath the airfield. Parts of a Celtic chariot thought to be around 2,000 years old were uncovered and have now been declared as national treasure. It was all part of Operation Nightingale, which looks to assist the recovery of wounded, injured and sick military personnel through involvement in archaeological investigations. And that was Reheat for Inside Air.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
My name is Emma Kirwan and I am a corporal.
What's your profession?
So I'm based at RAF Wittering, specifically on 3MCS Squadron.
What's the best thing about your job?
The best thing about my job is it's a completely different side to the catering. So we deploy out, we work for field kitchens, and the chefs that we have, they just produce food that you wouldn't think they'd be able to create in the environment that they have.
Hardest part of your job?
Occasionally we have to sleep in tents. It's not great, but I mean, sometimes transit's worse.
Best location you've served?
Again, anything with accommodation that's inside rather than outside. So Leaming, for example, we work in a HAS rather than outside, so it means that even if the conditions are horrible outside, just means that we've got somewhere nice and, dry inside instead.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
A softie, absolutely. It is the best bit of kit I've ever been issued.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
Proudest moment? Recently I've been picked up for promotion, so coming to the squadron on a newly promoted corporal, it's great, yeah. It's something I didn't really expect to happen quite yet, and it's happened quite early into my career, so yeah, very grateful for that.
Thank you, Corporal Emma Kirwan, for helping us cook up another episode of Under the Hat.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.